Okay, today we are here in person in Philadelphia to talk about grief. But most importantly, we are here with our friends from support services at the AFTD, Sarah and Esther. Would you guys like to each just kind of quickly introduce yourselves to our audience? Sarah, you go first. Put you on the spot.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sarah Lopata, and I am the manager of support services with the AFTD. And I work with our national support group network and the volunteers they facilitate our support groups and provide a lot of resources and information to their members across the country.
I'm Esther Kane. I'm AFTD's Director of Support and Education. I have been with AFTD now I just actually celebrated my 4-year anniversary, and I oversee all of our caregiver resource development, all of our support services, our helpline, all the mechanisms that we have to support families, as well as all of our healthcare professional education.
That's a lot.
Those are really important jobs.
They are very
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our community is very lucky to have you guys on our team. Okay, so we're going to do it a little different. We're going to take turns, kind of. You guys are going to pose some questions to us as two ladies with, lived experience of caregiving and losing our parents, and even the grief during the journey of caregiving as well. And then we're going to ask you guys some questions about just generally like what you hear from our community and like what you've learned, and just give you guys some more information on, the grief conversations that really just need to keep happening, and the unique grief experience that comes with loving someone with FTD or living with FTD.
Yeah.
Okay. So who wants to ask questions first?
I will.
Okay.
I think that being on this side of the journey, Maria and I have experienced a shift in the way we see grief and what we believe grief is. But I would love to hear from your guys' perspective, kind of like tapping into what you've heard from the community. Like, what do people think grief is? Like when somebody calls or somebody has a question or an email, like, what are you hearing? Like, I'm suffering. I'm like, what are they what are they asking about? What are they trying to get to?
I don't think most people know they're grieving when they're grieving. I think most people are angry and they don't know why they're angry. They're sad and they don't know why they're sad. They feel helpless and they don't know why they feel helpless. And so there's a lot of work that has to go into letting people talk about what they're experiencing and what's happening, and then trying to pull out what are they really feeling behind what they're actually saying. So I don't think that people always understand the amount of grief that they're actually carrying and what they're really feeling in the process. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about the journey, because when we call it out and say, I can hear you grieving, usually there's a light bulb that kind of goes off, or a feeling of, yeah, you know what, I'm really mad that this happened, or I'm really sad that this happened, or and is that grief? Is that grief that I'm feeling? And you're like, yeah, you're grieving.
Well, I think that kind of leads into one of the questions that I have is, when you were going through your journey, when did you think you were grieving? But now, looking back, when did you actually start grieving? When can you see that now?
What an amazing question.
Yeah. Me first. I think, okay, so it's sort of a two-part answer. I remember when my dad started to get a little bit more bizarre, my first response, and I've learned through learning more about grief, is everybody has that like comfort feeling. Mine is anger. And when he started to display, behaviors that are very socially inappropriate, I was really upset. Always. I'd wake up upset, go to bed upset. But I think now looking back, like that's when it started. I knew something was going on. I knew he was changing. I knew I was losing pieces of him, but I couldn't bridge the gap between like, oh, I'm feeling sad and it's not really anger. I was just like, what are you doing? Why are you going into the Mexican food restaurant asking for a chip in the back? Like, what are you doing? And I'd be so mad, so mad. We're getting this to go. Like, not okay. But as time went on and he became progressively worse and his body started to look different and his mannerisms changed and he was unable to walk, that's when I think like this sadness set in. And that's when I realized like I want to go back to when you would go get the chip in the kitchen of the Mexican food restaurant. So I think it's like a road that has all these twists and turns, and you don't really know when you come around the bend like what the next one's going to look like. And I feel like really there's unfortunately nothing that can prepare you for it. Like these behaviors and this experience with this type of neurological disease is so unique, but I think grief was there like from the get-go. I just didn't know what it was.
That's so good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for me, I think there is like a defining moment in my mind of like when that like heart-wrenching like sadness started. And it was that diagnosis room, like the aha moment of oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
this. And it's interesting because when we're participating in research, they do this historical kind of like background of, what led up to, what were the behaviors and tell me the whole story. And it was like when I got to that moment of in that room, I like just started sobbing when I was telling that part of the story because it felt like the moment that my life just completely shifted. Because I think there was grief of like, what's going on with mom? Like, why is she being different leading up to it? But just that like realization of, and the way that some doctors deliver the information is just, that this is what it is. And also they said, this is what it is. She probably lived maybe 7 years, but we think she has ALS, so probably cut that in half. And I'm just like, I think it was like, because I had no idea what this even was. And it wasn't even in the realm of possibility in my mind that there was something this cruel that existed in the world, that like that moment was just like everything shifted. And yeah.
I also think when you don't have the diagnosis, you're like, they're going through a rough time.
Yeah.
They'll snap out of it.
Yeah.
And then you get the diagnosis and it's so final.
You can't unhear that.
Right. Yeah. You can't unhave it.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
And you
like,
can't control it.
No.
There's nothing you can do to change it.
it was like out of body. It really was. Like, I remember the plastic chairs and just the look in the doctor's eyes, and like, I just don't even remember anything that happened like after that moment, like walking to the car. It just was it's really traumatic. I think when the trauma started, the grief like kicked in.
Yeah.
Is that too real?
No.
Okay.
Well, nothing's too real.
I think those are good examples of grief, though, too. The inability to feel in the moment, the walking back to the car numb.
Yeah.
Like those were all those were all grief that you were experiencing.
Right.
But we don't always put those feelings into that terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even like, we're going to take so many turns, I'm sure, in this conversation, but like, even so after that point, explaining the diagnosis and having to see other people take in that information, that was like another level of grief that it was like I went through it all over again, and I didn't want anyone to feel that pain that I felt, and I had to like put them through that.
And you didn't have a good example of how to deliver the message.
Right. Yeah.
Because your message, your model was the doctor who told you,
Which was awful.
No one should learn that way.
When people reach out to the AFTD and they say, I'm dealing with, like, I think this is the diagnosis. Do you think that caregivers are even thinking about their own grief? Or do you think there's more of a focus on tactile, like, how do I get this done? How do I do this? Is there, like, we've talked about this of like, sometimes there's a focus on how to fix whatever the immediate challenge is instead of focusing on the feeling? Or do you think people lead with feelings sometimes too? Like, what do you hear?
I would say that I don't think as, I guess, Americans, I don't even know if I want to phrase it that way, but our culture does not lead with feeling. And so I think people are really just in a tornado. They feel like they've been swept up into a tornado. They're just trying to get solid ground again, which is why they want the diagnosis, because they at least want to know what it is that they're dealing with. And so that whole time and process, they're just grabbing, trying to figure it out, looking at things. We developed these diagnostic checklists not too long ago, and I developed them as a tool to be able to help people kind of see the symptoms so they could relate with them. And surprisingly, that's actually how people are using them. And so I'm happy that it actually worked, but I think for a lot of people, they're just grabbing at whatever they can to find the symptoms. And as soon as I start to put the symptoms together with the diagnosis themselves, because I think a lot of times it's caregivers now who are going in and saying, I think this is what, my mom or dad or sister or brother or child has. So I don't think they're feeling yet at that time. I feel like they're really just
In that investigative mode of like trying to put these puzzle pieces together of like, what the heck?
And it's also like autopilot. I don't want to think about it right quite yet. I want to get this all situated before I can even like go there. Right. That's how I was like, where is he going to live? Like,
right.
Ugh.
I wonder, and I've been really training my mind to think of things a little bit more in this way, with earlier diagnosis, and we're getting, we're all doing so much work for awareness. So with earlier diagnosis, are you hearing from a lot of patients, people living with FTD, and are they expressing their grief or anything that you're comfortable sharing of like their feelings?
We have seen an increase in people who've been diagnosed with FTD who are reaching out for support, who want to find somebody else who's going through the same thing, because it's so isolating. And even your loved ones around you, your friends and your family, they can't understand what you're going through. So we do see more people asking for support, for a chance to connect with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. We do too. We've seen a large uptick.
Yeah, we have been hearing from people
reaching out.
Yeah, I think with earlier diagnosis and better,
diagnostic tools.
Yeah, I just think that we're catching people earlier on when they have more insight, and it just really breaks my heart. That like I think my mom probably experienced grief on some levels, but she wasn't at the point where she could articulate that, And I've actually posted in, some support groups before and said, does anyone know like therapists who work with, people living with FTD? And I've gotten some feedback before of like, that won't fix them. And I'm like, no. I know that won't fix them, but they're grieving too, and they need support as well.
I think it's a little bit of a spectrum, right? So some people don't really have a lot of anosognosia or lack of insight. And so for them, they really are grieving and they do need more support. Some people we talk to and they just are not even aware of their diagnosis. And I think those are some of the care partners or families who are kind of like, they wouldn't understand. And so, when we talk about FTD, it's a really diverse presentation, and not everybody looks the same. Not everybody presents with the same symptoms. Not everybody's diagnosed at the same time. Not everybody has the same family support, resources, that whole story. And so I think it's hard to try to gather like this uniformed concept of this is what it's like to live with FTD, because the message really, and I'm sure you guys know this, because how many stories have you listened to, that every story is a little bit different.
Yeah. Right. And I think something that we in particular don't or aren't, I don't want to say allowed, but before we start every podcast, we say, please let us know if there's something you don't want to talk about. If it's your relationship or you lost your job, whatever it is, 100% of the time, 110% of the time, it's do not ask me about my sister. Please don't ask me about my dad. Do not, there's always some sort of family discord. So not only are you grieving your loved one and you're grieving this new or existing diagnosis, you're grieving what you thought your family was going to look like. So the multi-level grief is something that, and I don't like to compare diseases, just like I don't like to compare my kids, right? But like cancer, sure. But the cancer, the person stays who they are for the most part, personality-wise. FTD, you're losing personality, you're losing speech, you're losing what your family was supposed to look like, you're losing jobs, you're losing, like, it's just one thing after the other. And I think it's the carpet gets pulled out from under you. And so you're trying to understand the disease, you're trying to get your feet back on the ground, you're trying to take care of your family. Like, who's taking care of you? No one. And then the caregiver burnout starts. So it's like this whole cycle of loss, and it's very heavy, I think. So I just think that we don't, as a culture, even go there. Like, oh, this person's calling for resources, but there's so many other things. This person's reaching out to us, but we don't know every millisecond of their life. It's a lot.
I'd like to dig in a little bit in the sibling thing, because I think we can talk about that in this environment because we see it.
Sure.
And so many times, well, and maybe sometimes it's harder to talk about when it's with a person, right? Because sibling relationships can be really, really difficult when
Really
you
fraught.
are trying to navigate caring for a person.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes back to grief, Rachel, right? Like, I think we can look at this and say a lot of times the problem is the way that everyone is processing their own grief looks different, right? They're dealing with different situations and they're processing it differently. And when I need you as my sibling to be supportive, you need to be yelling and screaming right now. And that's the last thing I need, but that's what you need, right? And so I'd love to dive into that a little bit more, because this is probably a venue where we normally can't, but we can.
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would be great, because it's like the most requested topic that nobody wants to discuss on the podcast. And I think this is an area we can really help people feel they're not alone, because there's so many layers to it, right? So there's like grieving the family unit the way it was, or grieving maybe what you thought your family relationship was, but now that something has happened, you're seeing the cracks, my husband was saying the other day, did you guys watch the fight?
Yes.
Oh.
Of course.
My husband was saying there's this Mike Tyson quote that I was like, this applies to FTD. It was like, everyone is a fighter, or everyone knows how to fight, or everyone thinks they're tough until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
That's not it.
It's okay.
It's just like everyone.
You think you can handle it until
like
in your
everybody
face.
thinks,
Yeah.
like, all right, we're okay. Our
Okay,
family's
yeah.
cool, whatever.
Mhm.
And then when you get hit with something, you're like,
You realize how strong you aren't.
oh,
Or how strong you are.
Yes.
Or-
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't always have to be negative. I understand. I think too, you are judging other people's grief.
I do that.
I do that.
And then I judge myself for judging them.
It's not judging. It's like, oh, your mom just died and you're not upset today? Like, it's not a judgment. You're just like, huh. That's how
But I'm like, why don't you want to show up for the caregiving the way I want to?
Yeah.
And why aren't you acting the way I think you should be acting? And also, a lot of times I felt like I was grieving for my mom, and you can analyze this and tell me. But like, when people didn't show up for my mom the way that I wanted them to, I hurt for her, because I was like, you are always there for everyone, and why can't they be there for you in this hard time? And I get it. It can be uncomfortable being with someone who interacts differently or is displaying some odd behaviors, but like she deserves to be treated like a human being. And I would get, that's where some of my angry grief was, of just like, come on, like show up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're like, but also you're her daughter, you're her son, you're her neighbor, right? Like you're judging them. And then I'm sure, knowing you, you feel bad for judging them.
Yes.
And then you judge yourself, and then the grief just.
All right.
Well, I think it's hard when you're in grief to not be angry when other people aren't grieving the way you feel like that levels up to your level of grief, so to speak.
Match me.
And I think, I think that's normal. I think that's really normal. I think that we want other people to be feeling as sad as we are and expressing it as we're expressing it. And that doesn't always, it's not always how people respond, especially like when you're looking at men versus women, like that can be a very different response. There's usually always one child who's the caregiver child who is carrying the full load. And then they are like, why do I have to do this by myself?
Yeah.
Why is nobody helping me? And then, you know, somebody else comes in and they're all totally uninvolved. Like we hear this all the time. The one brother wasn't involved throughout the whole process. The sister's been doing all the caregiving, all the work. He comes in the last minute and then wants to decide where so-and-so is being placed or where they're moving to, or they want to come in and make a decision. And you're like,
where have you been?
Yeah. Where have you been? Because I've been drowning for the last, you know.
If we're empathetic,
Yeah.
what's that brother going through?
Trauma. He has his own grief.
Sure. I think I'm an only child. And I think my struggle is like, if I'm not going to do it, who's doing it? Like you had siblings to support you.
Right.
I feel like there are some people when they come in and they're like, okay, I'm Frank's brother and I want him to be buried there. And I'm like, well, where have you been? It's not a fight I'm engaging in. Like my dad's dying. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And then I feel bad that I'm yelling at his brother for not showing up. I'll save that for a year out. You know what I mean? I'm not going to do it right then. But I think when somebody comes in and wants to kind of make these big decisions or share their opinions that they haven't shared for the past 2 years, it can feel distasteful.
Yeah.
You know? And then you get angry
This is
because
where a
you're
lot of
in
my
the
anger is.
trenches.
Yes.
But
All right.
I feel like not everybody, some people manage their grief by ignoring it. That's not how I manage it. But I think there are a large number of people out there that it's too hard. Yeah. So instead of facing it and just being with it, I'm going to run away and I'm not going to see my dad. And I'm going to use this self-preservation for now.
Now, with family conflict being such a, I mean, I think we could confidently say it's a theme in every situation, different levels and whatever, varieties. What do you guys suggest, or what support or what guidance do you give in managing that family conflict?
I think we need to have early discussions. Sometimes we wait until there's something traumatic happening or something too big to really start to discuss how we're going to manage a situation. I also think that when a diagnosis occurs, people go into fight or flight type of mentality. And so your true self shines. And then all of a sudden, this one just becomes the caregiver before it was really thought about, or this one becomes the one who's handling this, or you're making really quick decisions. So if I was going to give any advice, it'd be have these conversations earlier with your siblings if you can. Start to talk about as soon as you can, you know, how would we want to manage if mom and dad got sick? What would we want to do? How do we think that would work? You know, the more of those discussions you can have earlier, it'll make it so that you're not making these frenzied decisions, which actually I think lead to a lot of the discourse and the frustration that happens. And I think those families who don't have those discussions, they struggle with it the most, because the decisions were made out of, you know, or they're made out of necessity, right? The person who's the caregiver is the caregiver because they're a stay-at-home mom, or they're the oldest, or they're the
the
closest,
closest,
or they're the one that mom feels that she can talk to the most. So they're the one carrying the burden because mom, they have that relationship with mom. And family dynamics are really hard. It's a hard thing to walk through, but I think having early discussion is the number one thing that people can do, and having early discussions with the person diagnosed about what they want. I think a lot of argument comes into towards the end about
guessing what they want.
yeah. And the more we can have those really scary discussions earlier, the better the journey. And I shouldn't say better because I hate to say that. The smoother the interactions between family can be, because I don't think we ever can make the journey better right now. We're not there yet.
Right.
We're working on it. We're working hard, but that journey is too hard right now. But those conversations I think are really, that's the key to really getting there. And there are therapists who can help you sort through it. But sometimes the grief is so deep in that space that nobody can intervene, and you kind of just got to get through it and then see how you can heal on the other side.
I have a thought on that, but Sarah, it looks like
I actually was going to mention like using therapy as a tool for yourself, whether other family members are also doing that, but trying to walk through that with somebody who can give you feedback about why maybe people are acting the way they are.
or setting boundaries around that.
Setting boundaries and knowing what your limits are and what you can ask of other people. And it's hard when, even if you know that everybody in this situation is grieving, it's hard that you feel like you have to carry that responsibility of having the compassion for everybody.
Yes.
And letting them take their time. And I think we all could use a little like love and forgiveness for ourselves to honor that what we're going through is, there is no roadmap, and it's not linear. It's so hard to go through it, and to be dealing with family dynamics that maybe for decades have been the way they are or have changed over time, that had nothing to do with FTD or everything to do with FTD.
True.
FTD
Sometimes it is. Yes. And I
Good
think
explanation.
and I think, you're really stressing like communication, right? And trying to have those conversations. And I think what happens a lot of times is the person affected by FTD is a lot of times the person that was kind of managing all the like they were the glue, like they were the
buffer.
Yeah, they were the buffer. They like, what I had noticed, I'm comfortable saying this, is just that I had to reconfigure all my relationships in my family when my mom could no longer be that central piece, because I think she was a buffer. She, said to this one, go easy on this one. Okay, that one. Okay, you can be a little tougher with that. Like, she knew, she was such an individualized like parent that she knew everybody's needs, and we were all very codependent. And so she really was managing a lot of that. And I think we had to learn what our family looked like, without or having those abilities to do that anymore. But I never anticipated how much grief would come with what my new family looked like. Like, I knew that I was always racing towards this. What's the end going to be? When is it going to happen? What is it going to look like? What is my life going to be like without my mom? Like, how are my kids going to grow up and not have their grandma? Like, I thought about all those things, and they're all also awful. But I never thought about these other layers. Like, okay, my dad's going to move on. That's a possibility. And what's that going to look like? And how's our relationship going to change? And, this sibling might not be as close to me. Or I think I was so focused on like the obvious that I just didn't realize. And it kind of like hit me right in the gut. Like, I wasn't prepared for all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel's like, I know, and I therapize her all the time. I help her work through it.
I'm wondering if you guys ever get or have resources for complicated grief. Like the grief where maybe your loved one was diagnosed, but you don't really like them as much. Like we've had a couple people on the podcast that have said, like, why do you share all these like happy stories? Not every family is so wonderful where everybody comes together and cares and it's great. Like one girl in particular is like, I hate my mom. Doesn't bother me that she has this. And we're like, okay,
That's valid.
yeah, very valid. But how do you, or what do you say to somebody that's looking for resources like that? And if you don't know, you don't
It
have
does
to know.
happen. I know
Yeah.
it does.
No.
No,
I
it
think
does.
it's-
But I don't know if people like come out and be like, hey, AFTD, I hate my
do.
sister.
They do.
They do.
They do. A lot on the helpline because they can talk to one person. It's not public. They can kind of just say,
safe space.
yeah, safe space. It's confidential. You're just talking to one social worker who's helping you navigate your situation. But I think a little bit of is I don't think people know what complicated grief is necessarily, or that they're open. Yeah, do you want to give the
To
definition?
define it.
I can't, I mean, it's, yeah.
You're a certified grief expert. Look into the camera.
I don't know if it is anything. I mean, when you think of complicated grief, you kind of separate the two. Something that's complicated isn't very straightforward. There's a lot of layers. There's things that maybe have come and gone and you've sorted through and now you're kind of triggered again. Like it's not just run of the mill. Somebody passed away and now I'm sad. There's like dysfunction and luggage and stuff that you're bringing to the table. So it makes things murky. Anything that's complicated is just a little bit less forward. So when you add grief to it, it's complicated grief. It's I love you, but I hate you. I don't want you to die, but I won't be sad if you die. Like there's a lot of mixed feelings. That's what that is.
I feel like this is the person who, you're right. I don't care if you die. I don't care what's happening. I'm not involved. And yet they're home and they're watching a movie or they're out at the beach or some kind of weird setting and they just break down because they're grieving the relationship they wish they had. The fact that they're probably never going to be able to have that relationship at this point.
Right.
And it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot to carry. But I feel like when people have complicated grief, that grief really shows up in unexpected ways, in unexpected settings, and they're not prepared for it because they didn't think they were ever going to feel that way.
Esther, I know you have a question for us. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I thought we could talk a little bit about the grief that kind of occurs as the person with FTD, as the disease is progressing and they're starting to show symptoms. So the grief of the loss of empathy that happens in your relationship, the grief of why don't they care about me anymore before you even have a diagnosis to put to it. I feel like that's a lot of where the grief journey starts for so many people. And it then just builds. It's like this tumbling down a hill avalanche that falls on people. But when you've had a dad who you've been close to your whole life, or a mom you've been close to, or you've had this certain kind of relationship and all of a sudden they don't care you're getting married. They don't care you graduated. So those stories are the ones that really break me.
Oh, there's so much I could say about that, and I appreciate that you like recognize that piece. Like that was like the catalyst for the start of Remember Me podcast. Was that of like I didn't feel like anybody understood that piece of it. And I feel like there's a lot of healing, also grieving, that has come after my mom has passed, of going back and processing that time. And I think you're pinpointing also that time of like, where does my loved one end and the disease begin? That murky time. Because for me, it was my wedding. My mom was being so bizarre. Like, why are you being like this? Like, this is not who you are. Like, this isn't what I pictured. Like, and I really did think, like, maybe she just doesn't really care about me anymore. And I do think, like, somehow that was easier than trying to accept that, like, something was really wrong with her. Like, I would rather be like, she doesn't love me anymore than, like, she's going to die from something. I don't even know what to call it, but something's going on. And I think that that particular time is the most isolating time. And I think that's when the grief is really overpowering, because you can't put your finger on it and nobody understands, and you don't really know, is this my relationship? Because they look like themselves, but they're acting so different, and your brain is just, it's just very confusing. I think that's a very confusing time that I've had to go back through and sort, and, like, I don't know, I think with more understanding of the disease, I've started to, like, kind of heal parts of myself that, were really hurting during that time.
I have an opposite feeling. Not that I haven't healed. I feel like I'm sort of healing. Yes, you're understanding better. I think so. When you were like, why doesn't my dad care that I'm graduating? Like, that's when I was like, why is he outside? Like, I hosted my family. They all came up to Santa Barbara. I thought I was, like, big and cool. I got, like, a fruit platter, had it inside from, like, Vaughn's. I'm thinking, like, this is it. My family is going to be like, she's an adult. And my dad just stayed out on my balcony. And he graduated from UCSB too with an English major, just like me. So I thought, like, he's going to be. And he had no interest in talking to me about it or eating my damn fruit platter that I went out and bought. He's like, good job. I'm like, thanks.
That's it.
Yeah. But I felt more sorry for him than I felt for me at that point. I knew, because Esther, I think you said, like, I know you're my mom. Like, why are you acting like that? Like, I knew in somewhere deep in there, and I probably just wanted to push it away, that, like, this wasn't good. Whatever was happening there wasn't him, and it wasn't normal. So I chalked it up to whatever he's going through, either A, doesn't involve me, or B, he's not ready to talk about, or C, he doesn't know. And it was C. And there's such a level of, when you're going through it, you're looking at it from your lens. Like, how is this affecting me? What am I thinking? And I was always using that lens to wonder, like, what is this like for him? And I don't know if that was a good thing all the time, because then I would spiral into, like, he's so uncomfortable, or, X, Y, and Z. But I think when that period of time of, like, you're different and I don't know why, is excruciatingly difficult, but I think it might be more difficult for them.
Because they must be so confused.
Like,
So scared.
Yeah.
So scared.
There are days where I'm like, I'm not going to do the laundry today. Not because it's a lot or because I can't. I'm just like, I'm not going to do it. And then I'm like, why am I not doing it? Am I okay? Like, what are my kids going to think? I don't know. The doctors don't know the brain and how it fully works and all of that. But I second guess myself when I don't do the laundry for one day. And he's standing outside my balcony, not coming in. Is he like, I just don't want to. I'm uncomfortable.
Like,
And I'm like, oh, and then he's uncomfortable. So that part was, I think I said that's, like, kind of where my grief began. But I always used it from his perspective. Like, what could this be like for him? He couldn't come to my wedding. He was extremely behavioral at that point. And I told him, I'm like, I wish you could be there. And he was like, oh, I don't. And I'm like, I know you don't. Of course you don't want to be there. You don't want to talk to people. I get it. Didn't feel great to hear, but like he has a neurological disease, you know? So
That's a great like tip almost, you
Yeah.
know, like because you were able to look at that and go, I know right now you're saying you don't want to go, and I get that. I
Right.
realize it's not that you didn't love me, and if you didn't have FTD, you would be there, right? So
yes.
I think when you can look back and realize that it's the FTD, it's not you,
Yeah.
it's not me and you,
Right.
it's the disease,
Right.
that is liberating
Sure.
for so
Sure.
many people, because you can look back on that now and go, it was that dang disease, Dad,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it wasn't you,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Right.
And like I can still know that without FTD,
Right.
you would have been there.
Totally.
Right?
1,000%.
Like, yeah.
And I think that's what's missing is like, I was so focused on like quality of life, care. Like, is he okay? Is he okay? There were days and months where I missed like just being like, I know this sucks. I know you know it sucks.
Yeah.
You know, and really like connecting with him. I was just like, okay, we got to get the meds and the wheelchair and there's another level of grief and misunderstanding and family discord. And my mom's like, why are you being so accommodating to your dad?
Yeah.
He's fine. He's sitting there in the wheelchair. I'm like, because it sucks for him.
Yeah.
He's sitting there, he can't move.
I think some people, myself included, I felt guilty sometimes, like crying in front of my mom, or if she was crying, I didn't want her to feel any discomfort. But I wonder if she felt like validated in seeing the emotion, because maybe that's something she was feeling that she couldn't express. But I also just want to get back to what you're saying. Like, I think understanding the disease, that is where a lot of healing, or just like working through a lot of things, has happened for me. Because I look back at certain moments, like when I told my mom that I was pregnant with Liam, my first child, she said, "Can we go to Wegmans now?" And I was like, well, she doesn't care.
Yeah.
And I knew she had FTD, and I knew maybe like I knew that was kind of the reason for her behavior, but I didn't fully understand it. And then we were talking to an expert at the Penn FTD Center, and she said, and I told her, but on the flip side, there was this beautiful moment when Liam was born and she saw us in the hospital, and you knew she knew. She ran to the baby, and like it was this magical moment. And she was like, your mom had PPA. She probably didn't know what the word pregnant was. Like, she probably did not understand what you actually said to her. And I was like, oh. And my thought now on that whole interaction, and still it's painful. Nobody wants that to be, what happens when you tell your parent, they're going to be a grandparent for the first time. But I just didn't know. I didn't know the disease. I knew it was horrible. I knew that, honestly, it was like, I knew she was going to die. I knew it was terminal. I knew it was going to get worse, but I didn't understand all the mechanisms and behaviors. And I think it really has helped to separate that from her, if that makes sense.
The disease, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't, it's the disease. It's the disease that's horrible. It's the disease that doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's not your mom.
Yeah.
Because your mom cared.
Yeah.
Like
She's the best.
yeah, she cared. And you can know that when you look back and say, I knew she would have cared.
Yeah.
Right? We talked about one day her grandkids at some point, or
She
we
would've
knew
lived for
yeah.
them.
Yeah, you knew she would have loved this.
Right.
And so you can kind of like make those connections and see that. But it's hard in the moment when you're with somebody and they just can't share in your joy.
And it's almost like this vacant kind of like, I can't access you.
You're speaking a different language almost.
Yeah.
I think that's such a revelation to hear that.
Yeah.
That just, if you could go back in that moment and realize that maybe she just didn't know what you were saying.
Right.
Is there a way you could have said it in a different way, or, you know, yeah, but
Yeah.
that is, it's so hard to have gone through that in that moment. But I do think that I just think that everybody sharing their stories just leads to more understanding
Right.
and hope for more families to have that opportunity too.
Yeah.
I think there's shame. You mentioned shame. I think it's important to like kind of bring that back up. If like, I think sometimes there's shame in sharing that my mom did that. You know,
Yeah.
that's I'm sure lesser on the scale of a lot of stories we hear. There's a lot of things that happen with this disease, but I think that when you can open up and share these experiences or share them with your doctor, or you know, just it just helps us all understand and feel less alone, you know, when we put it all out on the table, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
Shame is an isolator too, right? So like shame wants to make you not tell your story. Shame wants to make you think poorly of like your mom in that situation when you know full well she just had a disease that was making it so she couldn't process that information. And I think shame plays a big role, and I think it plays a big role in our grief, and we all do it. Every single person in one way, shape, or form has this. But I feel like shame is a place where really we can really end some stigma around FTD. When we combat that shame and we really call out that this was a disease, it wasn't the person, and how we treat the person matters, is something that we can do and that can make a really significant difference in people's lives right now. So thank you for saying it, even though it's hard, because it's those things that we say that are hard that are making it better for the people who are living with the disease right now.
Right. I also think I don't want to say taboo. That's not the right word. But people are afraid to be like, hey, can you help me with my mom? Could you help me with my dad? I need to run to the market, or I just need a minute. Can you come over here and like sit? We were at the Penn FTD Center. There was a gentleman who had FTD. You could see it. And his wife brought him over to the table. He just needed to sit down for a second. And it was lunchtime. And we were like, we're going to move. You take over the table. Enjoy. And she was like, no, no, no. And I looked at her and I'm like, are you kidding? Yes. You can have this table. And so can he. Like, we're not here. I'm here to help you. And help or assistance or support is seen, I think, in some cultures and some people's minds as a weakness. Right. Oh, you can't do it yourself? Why can't you do it yourself? My husband will ask me that. You can't do that yourself? I'm like, I just want to do it with you. But I think there's a level of it's okay to ask for help. Number one. Number two, it's okay to say, I'm sad today. I want to talk about how horrible this is, and I don't want anyone to fix it. I just want to say, this sucks. I wish my dad wasn't eating the Mexican chips in the Mexican food restaurant in the kitchen. But also, like, he's totally happy. How am I going to tell him no? Come sit down.
Yes.
Who cares? Sorry, sir. Sorry, guys. My dad will fix it. But I don't know. It wasn't easy for me to call a girlfriend and be like, my dad opened the car door when I was driving today and almost killed us. So how was your day? You know what I mean? So
yes,
I think there's not a lot of space for the interim big feelings. And I think FTD is full of them. I think we're full of grief. I think we're full of helpless and hopelessness. But I also think it's so beautiful. I know people may go, whoa, I'm pausing this podcast, but the relationship that I got to recultivate with my dad in silence was the best relationship I've ever had in my life. And I wish I could get it back. Like, I don't miss all of the wonkiness, but I miss that the most. Just the silent understanding. I'm going to take care of you just the way you took care of me, and I'm going to usher you through this whole experience. People don't talk about that. I can't call my neighbor and be like, oh, I just changed my dad's diaper. I'll be over in a bit. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear, I'm doing great. My dad's fine. Yeah, everything's fine.
Or they want to fix it, like you were
Yeah.
saying. Oh, have you tried this? Have you
Yeah.
tried? No, I just want to.
I want someone
say
to
it.
walk with me.
Yeah. I just want
Yeah.
I just want you to go, ugh.
That's such a cultural thing of like well, at least, or trying to pad it with some positivity. And
Yeah.
of course, we always look for the beauty and the light, but there are parts of this disease that are ugly.
Yes.
I think what it is that people don't, they don't want you to be in pain anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
so,
well-meaning.
Yeah.
well, and so they're kind of trying to fix it so that you're not suffering anymore.
Sure.
And really, I think, it's the best way you can help me not suffer anymore is just listen, just
Yeah.
be here, have
Yeah.
a cup of coffee with me,
Yeah.
answer the phone.
Sure.
Don't make me feel so alone.
Right.
That is the best thing that you can do for me,
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's hard because it's just not natural for us in those situations. And they feel they're brokenhearted for you that you're going through that or whatever your situation is.
Right.
And no, I feel like if we can just get people to be better friends sometimes, I think that a lot of families would do a lot better.
Yeah.
I haven't figured that one out yet. We're working on it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's like, how do we help people figure out how to walk with people?
Yeah.
It would be such a difference
Right.
in their journey.
You're my path. I just want you to be next to me.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell me, like, you're right. This is awful.
Yeah.
Station.
Yeah.
That's where our friendship, was so close so fast, because there was no, like, I don't know, how would you describe it? Like when we first met, like there was no, like, I didn't have to be nervous to be like, my mom's doing this. You're like, I understand.
Yeah.
There's space for that. Like there was just this open space to just really freely discuss, like, deeply what we were feeling when we didn't even really know each other.
Right. Yes, we knew each other somewhat. But yes, I think society has a lot of work to do in many different facets, but compassion and understanding there's a huge deficit. And we spoke to Brooke E.B., who is a huge ALS advocate. And she was like, my biggest piece of advice and my takeaway, I say always, is don't look away. Don't look away from me. And I've used that throughout hearing it, but also like, don't look away from my grief, but don't look away from my dad either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's still enjoying what he can. And
he's still here.
right. And I think it's very difficult to like wrap grief and loss into a pretty little bow, but I don't find it to be like a dark experience. And I think most people do.
I think I've learned more about myself through this grief journey than I've ever learned before.
Same.
I think also we can do a better job in our society talking about grief, talking about what does it look like, all the different ways it can look from when kids are little, right? To talk. We always say, what is the feelings chart with the little faces, and kind of validating that you can be angry, but also why are you angry? And if you give people the vocabulary, the words to really talk about those things from such a young age, then maybe we are setting people up for the potential to be able to walk together. And I don't know.
Leave it to Sarah, changing the world.
Thank you, Sarah.
That was really fun.
Sometimes I do think that we're breaking the world open. Like, maybe it's our generation that is tired of watching everybody not showing up. And we do want people to show up, and we want people to walk with us. And it isn't fixed yet,
Right.
but walk with me so I'm not alone doing this.
Right.
And I think that we have a lot of power in our generation. There's potential.
That was really good.
I think we're breaking the world open. Oh my God. I'm going to take that and run with it. That was really good. What?
I don't even know what to say to
Oh.
that.
I know.
It was making me think of like bittersweet. Like I want you to get your bittersweet moments in there.
I also think that there's a way to, alongside like giving a robust vocabulary about feelings and all of that, I think the bad feelings specifically, I think we're taught that, oh, no, you don't cry when so-and-so hits you. You talk it out, or no, mommy comes back. I think you could say like, I know it's hard for you when mommy leaves. I know it's hard for you when your friend leaves you. Nobody likes to be like, come on, it's fine. Who cares? Like there's no validation anymore. I think there's a way to gently talk about the hard stuff and the bad feelings while also matching them with their counterpart, right? So this is really hard when Brandon hits you in the sandbox. I understand. But now we have the opportunity to go find another friend. Let's go. Not everything has to be so like doom and gloom and everything is bad. Like I think there's just a different tone maybe that this generation is really trying to elevate.
Yeah.
So I think that as people who all walk with people in their grief, you guys listen to so many stories, talk to so many families walking in grief. Sarah and I at AFTD are listening to so many stories. There's a concept of where we have to learn to walk with people in their grief too. And what does that look like? So if you were going to give a tip of how you walk with people in their grief, what would be your tip?
I have nothing to say. No, I'm kidding. I think my biggest tip would be grief is a landscape. And to look at one portion of that landscape doesn't give you the full picture. Widen your lens. Take a look at everything. Not all at once because that's very consuming. But I think if you can come from a pinpoint up to a bird's eye view and really look at all the aspects. And you can be sad and upset, and you can be in mourning, and you can be angry. But I think if you elevate above sort of ground level and look across all parts of your life, it puts things in perspective a little bit. That's number one. Number two, I've told, I don't know how many people, grief is meant to be integrated. It is never meant to be gotten over, ever. Never, ever. So when people are like, oh, she's still being upset about her dad over there. Yeah, I'm upset, but it's integrated. It's part of who I am now. It's always with me. I'm never not upset that he's not here. So I think the tip of, for me, like in my own head, when someone's like, I'm mourning, I'm like, let's elevate a little bit. Let's see the rest of your life and see where the grief can kind of percolate a little bit and integrate itself in there. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're always going to be sad or you're going to need clinical depression therapy. Like you're going to be okay. And there's zero timeline. There are days where I'm like, I'm not getting out of bed today because I'm sad. And then the next day I'm at Disneyland. Like it doesn't, there's no right or wrong. And it doesn't have to be bad. It really doesn't. It can hurt, but that's what makes you human, is that you can feel that hurt. If you were a robot, you wouldn't be able to feel that.
Yeah. I have a little different angle.
Okay. I thought you would.
We're a yin and yang situation. There's a couple things that I would like tell someone, like if they, I think this is what you're asking me, like, how would I want someone to walk with me in my grief? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I answered the question very wrong.
No, I think it was still very relevant. So I think a lot of times people assume that you don't want to talk about it. Like people would always say, I don't want to make you sad. I don't want to ask about your mom. I don't want to make you sad. I'm thinking about it every day. So for me personally, like, don't be afraid to ask me about it. And also I've had friends say, I don't want to talk to you about, going through this breakup. Like you're going through way, way more. And I would be like, No, I want to be a part of that. Like, I don't want to feel isolated. So if you can make me feel that we're in this together, whatever it is, whatever you're going through, whatever I'm going through, that we can bring it to the table together and walk it together and put it out there. But I'm someone, I like to talk it all out. So I want to talk about it. Like, that's where I feel supported. I don't like the tiptoeing around, and I don't want to say something because it may make you upset about your mom, or I don't want to burden you with my problems because your problems are so much bigger. I don't like that. I want to be in it together. And I like that. I like talking it out, and don't assume, that I don't want to talk about it. Because for me, I like to.
I think what I feel, I guess similar to you, like if one of my friends calls and they're like, oh my God, I just drove by your old house. It reminds me of your dad. That's when I'm like, God, his impact is in so many different areas. I love when people bring him up. It keeps him right next to me. It's not something to be like, I know you. I'm sorry. I don't want to make you upset. I think about him day and night. What do you mean? You're just adding to my thought. That I also think I don't like being told like it's okay. Yeah. You're sad. It's okay. It's not okay. It will be okay.
Oops.
But not right now. Like I like people saying, this sucks. I could tell this sucks.
Yes, like my Pia.
Yeah.
My aunt, when she was interviewed for the podcast, she said something that people have repeated to us. They resonated, particularly with that episode because it's a sibling episode. And I feel like the sibling perspective and a sibling grief is not talked about a lot in our community, because I think siblings feel like, oh, it's not as bad for me. It's okay. I'm not the spouse. I'm not the child. Okay. So my aunt said in the episode that when my grandfather died and she was at the funeral, people come up and they say, oh, he's in a better place, all these things. Someone went up to her and hugged her really tight and said, it's the pits.
Yep.
And she was like, yes. Like, someone called it like it was. They didn't say like, he's in a better place, he's not suffering anymore. They were like, this sucks. And she was like, it does, and it just goes back to just like sitting with people in it, like just validating, like, I know I can't make this better. It's hard, and I'm gonna sit here with you and we're gonna go through it together.
Right. That's why I don't like it's okay. It's not okay.
I think I'd say it's okay to you sometimes. I'm sorry.
No, it's what we say. We say it to our kids. Oh, it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not for that person. And I think that that's okay. It's okay. Like Megan Devine says, it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to be okay all the time.
So you guys get to experience, coming into people's lives and, really sitting and walking with them in their grief and being there for all the highs and lows. And I happen to think that this FTD community is very special. Can you tell us, maybe about the resilience that you see in the community, or what you've learned about our FTD community through walking through these like really dark times with them?
I would say that the FTD community is the most passionate community I've ever worked with, and very often it is an honor to be able to serve them and to be able to work to really make a difference for the future. So many people walk through caring for somebody with FTD, living with FTD, being a child of FTD, and they take all that pain and all that grief and they run a marathon, or they start a podcast, or they, volunteer, or they advocate, or they are getting proclamations and resolutions, or they're talking to researchers, or they're making their voice heard and their story heard to change the future for everyone else affected. And so I think that the beautiful thing about the FTD community is they have figured out how to turn their grief into action, really, and to really try to make the world, we got to fix this. We can't let families keep getting diagnosed like this and walking with this and not getting the support and services that they need.
I think I'm in awe every day of how people walk through those hard times, those moments, those years, decades of how hard FTD can be. And like Esther said, turning that grief into action. But there's just such a power in the vulnerability and the intensity. And I think because my experience is with volunteers who run support groups, and I hear their experiences and how they witness what their group members are going through. And I've never seen such beauty and humanity in people that I have in this community. And having a chance to meet people in person and be together when so many people are all over the country, all over the world, and yet you have such an intense relationship with them from afar. And then you come together and it's really just that humanity is so beautiful, and walking with each other in a grief, through grief. Some people turn away from that, but when you walk together through it, it makes you so strong together. It strengthens relationships and it builds new ones. And I don't know, every time I talk to somebody, I feel honored that they're willing to share their hardest times with me. Thank you.
I think that was perfect.
How